The day my husband's funeral ended, I thought the hardest part of my life was already behind me. I was wrong. 3 days after I buried the man I loved, my mother-in-law walked into my home, placed a folder on my kitchen table, and calmly said, "I want the house, the family business, and everything my son left behind." I stared at her, wondering if grief had somehow made me misunderstand her words. My husband was a retired Army colonel. He spent his entire life protecting people, building a legacy, and creating a future for the family he loved. But the moment he was gone, the people closest to him started fighting over what he had built. My attorney told me to prepare for a battle, but I did something nobody expected. I smiled, picked up a pen, and signed every document she placed in front of me. The courtroom went silent when the judge finally opened the file and asked one question that changed everything. My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 28 years old. I live in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and before everything changed, I thought I knew exactly what my future looked like. I was married to Michael Carter, a man who spent over 3 decades serving his country before retiring as an Army colonel. To most people, he was a decorated officer, a leader, and someone who had earned the respect of everyone around him. But to me, he was simply my husband. He was the man who remembered how I liked my coffee in the morning. The man who left little notes beside my laptop before leaving for meetings. The man who taught me that strength was not about never falling apart. It was about finding the courage to stand back up. After retiring from the military, Michael didn't slow down. He poured his energy into our family business, a small outdoor equipment company he had built from the ground up. It wasn't just a business to him. It was a symbol of everything he believed in: hard work, loyalty, and taking care of the people who depended on you. Our home was the place where he finally allowed himself to relax. The walls were filled with photographs from his military years, family memories, and little moments that mattered more than anything expensive ever could. I truly believed we would grow old there together. But life has a way of changing everything in a single moment. Michael's health declined faster than anyone expected. Even with the doctors doing everything they could, there came a day when I had to hold his hand and say goodbye. I remember sitting beside him in that hospital room, refusing to let go. I kept thinking about all the plans we still had, the trips we wanted to take, the quiet mornings we thought we would have together. When I finally returned home after his funeral, the silence felt unbearable. Every room reminded me of him. His jacket was still hanging near the door. His favorite chair was still exactly where he left it. His coffee mug was still sitting in the kitchen cabinet. I was trying to learn how to live in a world where my best friend no longer existed. But I didn't know that while I was grieving, someone else was already making plans. 3 days after the funeral, my mother-in-law, Victoria, walked through my front door carrying a folder. She didn't hug me. She didn't ask how I was surviving. She simply placed the folder on the table and looked at me. Then she said the words I never expected to hear. "My son is gone, and I believe everything he built belongs with his family." I stared at her, confused. Then she continued, "The house, the business, everything Michael left behind." And in that moment, I realized my husband's death had not ended the fight. It had only begun. I wish I could say I was shocked by Victoria's demand, because it came out of nowhere. But deep down, there had always been signs. My relationship with my mother-in-law had never been simple. She was not the type of person who openly caused arguments or raised her voice. She had a much quieter way of making people feel small. She believed she knew what was best for everyone, especially Michael. For years, she treated him like he was still the young soldier who needed her approval. Even after he became a respected colonel, even after he built a successful business and created a life of his own, she still expected him to follow her wishes. Michael loved his mother, but he also understood boundaries. That was something she never accepted. After his funeral, Victoria seemed less interested in mourning her son and more interested in discussing what he had left behind. She walked through our house pointing at things like they already belonged to her. "The furniture should stay with the family," she said. "The business was built because of our family name. Our family deserves to keep what Michael created." I listened quietly, still trying to process the fact that the woman standing in front of me was talking about possessions while I was still grieving the loss of my husband. When I told her that Michael had left legal documents and that everything would be handled properly, she smiled. Not a kind smile, a confident one. She looked at me and said, "Emily, you were his wife for a few years. I was his mother his entire life." Those words stayed with me because she truly believed love was measured by history, not by the life someone chose to build. A week later, I met with Michael's attorney, Daniel Harris. He had worked with Michael for years and knew every detail of his estate planning. After hearing what Victoria wanted, he leaned back in his chair and looked concerned. "Emily, you need to understand something," he said. "Your mother-in-law may try to challenge certain decisions. She believes she has a claim." I looked down at the papers in front of me. I was exhausted. I had lost my husband, and now I had to defend the life we created together. But Daniel said something that caught my attention. Michael was very specific about his wishes. He prepared for every possibility. That sentence made me pause, because I knew Michael. He was a man who planned everything, every mission, every decision, every detail. And suddenly, I wondered what he had prepared for after he was gone. Because Victoria walked into my home believing she had already won. But she had no idea what Michael had actually left behind. The day we walked into the courtroom, I could feel everyone watching me. Not because I was making a scene, not because I was angry, but because I was calm. And for some reason, my silence seemed to confuse everyone more than an argument ever could. Victoria arrived wearing an expensive suit, carrying herself like someone who had already received the outcome she wanted. She walked beside her attorney with complete confidence, greeting people as if she was entering a business meeting instead of a courtroom. She looked at me once and smiled. That same smile, the one that said she believed she was smarter than everyone else in the room. I sat beside Daniel, my attorney, holding the folder containing the documents Michael had prepared before his passing. Daniel leaned toward me and whispered, "Emily, are you sure about this?" I knew exactly what he was asking. He wanted to know if I was really prepared to let this happen. I simply nodded, because I was. The hearing began with both sides presenting their arguments. Victoria's attorney painted a picture of a grieving mother who had supposedly been pushed aside after losing her son. He talked about family legacy. He talked about Michael's achievements. He talked about how Victoria believed she deserved to maintain control over the things her son built. But what he never talked about was what Michael wanted, because that was the one thing they had overlooked. They assumed they knew what was best. They assumed I was too emotional to fight. They assumed grief had made me weak. But they didn't understand something about my husband. Michael had spent his entire military career preparing for situations where things could go wrong. He believed in planning ahead. He believed in protecting the people he loved. Even after his death, he was still protecting me. When the judge asked if there was any possibility of an agreement, Victoria's attorney immediately suggested a settlement. He slid several documents across the table, and then everyone looked at me. They expected me to refuse. They expected a dramatic argument. They expected me to fight for every dollar, every piece of property, every part of the business. Instead, I picked up the pen, and I signed. The courtroom became completely silent. Daniel looked at me with disbelief. Even the judge paused. Victoria looked almost surprised for a moment, but then that surprise turned into satisfaction. She leaned back in her chair, clearly believing she had won. After everything she had said, after everything she demanded, she finally thought she was getting exactly what she wanted. Outside the courtroom, people whispered that I had given up. Some thought I had made the biggest mistake of my life, but they didn't know what I knew. They had only seen me sign papers. They had no idea what those papers actually meant. And they had no idea what the judge was about to discover when he opened Michael's final documents. For a few seconds after I signed those documents, nobody moved. The courtroom was so quiet that I could hear the sound of papers being organized on the judge's desk. Victoria looked at me like she was trying to understand why I wasn't upset. She expected tears. She expected anger. She expected me to beg for what she believed belonged to her. But I didn't, because I knew something she didn't. The documents she thought represented her victory were not what they appeared to be. The judge slowly reviewed the paperwork in front of him. He turned each page carefully, his expression becoming more serious with every paragraph he read. Then he stopped. He looked toward Victoria's attorney. "Counselor," he said, "can you explain why these documents were submitted without the attached estate instructions?" Victoria's attorney immediately looked uncomfortable. The confidence that had been there all morning started to disappear. He glanced through his files and quietly admitted that he did not have those additional documents. The judge looked back at me. "Mrs. Carter, do you have the complete file?" I nodded. Daniel stood and handed the judge a sealed folder. It was the final document Michael had prepared before his passing. The one Victoria never knew existed. The courtroom watched as the judge opened it. And as he began reading, everything changed. Michael had not simply left behind a will. He had created a detailed plan explaining exactly what he wanted for the future of his wife and the business he had built. He had written that the house was not just property. It was our home, the place where we created memories, the place where he wanted me to feel safe after he was gone. He had also made arrangements for the family business to continue under my leadership because he believed I understood its values and direction better than anyone else. But the part that changed the entire courtroom was the section about outside interference. Michael had specifically included instructions protecting his decisions from anyone who tried to challenge them based on personal expectations rather than legal rights. The judge looked over the document one more time. Then he turned toward Victoria. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "your son's wishes were very clear." For the first time that day, Victoria didn't have an answer. The woman who had walked into the courtroom believing she had already won suddenly looked uncertain. Her attorney lowered his papers. The confidence was gone. And everyone in that room finally understood why I had not fought. I wasn't surrendering. I was trusting the man who had spent his entire life protecting the people he loved. The judge closed the file. Then he asked one final question that made the entire courtroom silent. Why was this information not presented before today? And in that moment, the truth everyone had been waiting for finally came out. The judge's decision was not just about money. It was about truth. After reviewing Michael's documents, the court confirmed that his wishes were clear. The house, the business, and the future we had planned together would remain protected exactly as he intended. Victoria had walked into that courtroom believing she was fighting for what belonged to her. But what she really wanted was control. And for the first time, she had to face the fact that Michael had made his own choices. He had spent his entire life making decisions for himself, and even after he was gone, he was still making sure his voice was heard. After the hearing, I stood outside the courthouse holding the folder that contained my husband's final wishes. I thought I would feel victorious, but honestly, I didn't. I just felt grateful, because the greatest thing Michael left me was never the house or the business. It was the reminder that I had been loved by someone who truly saw me, trusted me, and believed in me. A few months later, I returned to the office and continued running the company. I kept many of Michael's traditions alive, not because I was stuck in the past, but because I wanted his values to continue. Victoria eventually stopped trying to fight. Maybe she realized she had lost. Or maybe she finally understood that Michael's legacy was never something she could take. It belonged to the people he chose to protect. And that was me. I learned something after losing my husband. Family is not always defined by who shares your blood. It is defined by who respects your heart, your choices, and your place in their life. Michael spent his whole career protecting others. In the end, even after he was gone, he was still protecting me.